around the world. Bonjour, bon après-midi, bonsoir. We are very happy to welcome you to this webinar on the evolution of IDEV's evaluation practice and its use for post-pandemic recovery. My name is Karen Rot-Munsterman. I'm the Evaluator General of the African Development Bank. And we are organizing this event in the context of the G-Local Evaluation Week. We're very happy to have you all with us. A few housekeeping announcements. We do have interpretation, so please see the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Panelists will be speaking in both English and French. Nous avons de l'interprétation simultanée. Veuillez cliquer sur l'icône du globe en bas de votre écran pour choisir votre langue préférée. Please all mute your microphones when you are not speaking to minimize interference. The event will be recorded and the recording will be made available on the IDEV website afterwards. After some introductory remarks, I will have two sets of questions for our panelists, and after each set, we'll take questions from the audience. So please type your questions either in the chat box or in the Q&A box in either French or in English. And we will take your questions during the two Q&A sessions. So let me start with some opening remarks on the evolution of IDEV's evaluation practice. It's been, we're celebrating 40 years of evaluation. 2020 marks 40 years of the evaluation function at the African Development Bank. And since the first dedicated evaluation unit was established in 1980, evaluation has become an integral part of how the bank operates, how it's held accountable, and how it learns from what works and what does not work. What was once a small unit grew into the Operations Evaluation Department and eventually Independent Development Evaluation, IDEV. In 40 years, evaluations have informed so many policies, strategies, programs, and processes that it is now essential for the bank. We have also fostered learning from evaluations and building an evaluation culture within the bank and in its regional member countries. For over 2 years now, the world has been dealing with an unprecedented situation, the COVID-19 pandemic. Like the rest of the world, Africa was hit hard by the pandemic. The economic and social costs have been enormous and far-reaching, with numerous socioeconomic and environmental consequences. During this time, IDEV, like other evaluation offices, has faced several challenges in conducting evaluations, including with empirical data collection and site visits. Local and international travel restrictions resulted in limited access to governments, beneficiaries, and partners, hindering IDEV evaluation team's ability to collect evidence and conduct face-to-face interviews with key stakeholders. Given the many constraints and limitations, evaluation teams had to be creative and innovative in their job in this new working environment. At the same time, the COVID-19 pandemic also presented opportunities, such as accelerating the adoption of technologies, including in the evaluation practice, and pushed the world faster into the future. And it strengthened the demand for evidence to inform an agenda to build back better from the pandemic, addressing infrastructure gaps and economic and social challenges, and building resilience to future crises. So in recent years, IDEV evaluations have increasingly influenced the formulation, revision, and implementation of the policies, strategies, and processes of the AfDB. And this roundtable discussion will highlight how this evolution took place. We're also going to discuss how evaluations can help the Building Back Better agenda. So without further ado, let me address our panelists, introduce to you our panelists for today. First of all, we have with us Andrew Nguko, who is a Quality and Methods Advisor at IDEV. He advises evaluation teams on appropriate evaluation standards, approaches, designs, methods, and tools. He also undertakes quality assurance of various evaluation products and provides technical support to evaluations. Secondly, we have Joseph Mwanda, Chief Evaluation Officer, who has conducted many evaluations, mainly in the area of infrastructure. He has, for example, done extensive work on evaluating the bank's support for transport, energy, and water supply and sanitation. Jacqueline Niagahima is a Principal Knowledge Management Officer who has developed knowledge product dissemination and events for a variety of evaluations, including corporate, country, thematic, and impact evaluations, and she also organized our Evaluation Week in 2020. Guillermo Kumbi is another Chief Evaluation Officer. He has worked on a number of evaluations in the area of agriculture and irrigation, but also country strategy evaluations, such as those for Tanzania, Eswatini, Rwanda, and Uganda. And finally, May Mwaka, a Principal Evaluation Officer, has joined IDEV more recently and is working on an evaluation synthesis of support for inclusive growth and our midterm evaluation of the African Development Bank's Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy. So with that introduction, I'm going to go right into the first set of guiding questions for our panelists. And don't forget, if you want to ask questions to our panelists, please type them in the chat or in the Q&A box. Et donc maintenant, je vais parler en français parce que je vais parler à Joseph. Donc Joseph, vous êtes depuis assez longtemps chez IDEV, je crois presque 20 ans. Vous êtes parmi les doyens chez la fonction d'évaluation. Et comme le thème de la semaine locale d'évaluation est Evolve, j'aimerais vous demander quelles ont été les évolutions majeures chez IDEV au cours de votre carrière dans la fonction d'évaluation.
Merci Karen pour la question. Bien entendu, après 40 ans d'évaluation indépendante, et pour lesquels j'ai eu pratiquement la moitié de la période avec, parce que j'avais rejoint la banque en septembre 2001, j'avais rejoint la banque et aussi IDEV, qui en ce temps s'appelait OPEV. Des évolutions majeures se sont effectivement opérées avec beaucoup d'anecdotes, mais je vais essentiellement me focaliser sur quelques-uns que je juge critiques, capitales, dans le sens où ces évolutions ont permis d'améliorer un peu la visibilité de l'évaluation indépendante. La première évolution, c'est, je dirais, la réorganisation du centre d'intérêt de IDEV vers des évaluations sectorielles, thématiques, pays, institutionnelles, au détriment effectivement des évaluations des projets. Et il faut dire que cette évolution a débuté notamment avec notre programme de travail triennal 2013-2015, qui a commencé ou a suivi notre stratégie d'évaluation indépendante. Et donc, à partir de ce programme de travail, IDEV a commencé à mettre en avant les évaluations que nous qualifions des évaluations de haut niveau, mais moi, je dirais plutôt des évaluations stratégiques, en s'éloignant des évaluations individuelles des projets. Ça ne veut pas dire que nous n'évaluons plus les projets, mais nous le faisons de façon stratégique. Et donc, actuellement, en termes d'évaluation individuelle de projets, ce que nous faisons, ce sont la revue des rapports d'achèvement des projets pour le secteur public, la revue des supervisions élargies des projets du secteur privé et des évaluations rigoureuses d'impact, contrairement à ce que nous faisions avant, qui étaient plutôt des évaluations de performance. Et enfin, des évaluations groupées, parce que nous sommes rendus que la validité externe des évaluations individuelles était un peu limitée. Et il fallait apprendre d'un groupe de projets ce qui était commun ou ce qui différait selon le contexte. Et donc, nous avons vraiment, nous nous sommes tournés vraiment vers des évaluations plus stratégiques, mais en gardant en tête que lorsque nous faisons des évaluations des projets, il faut être plus spécifique sur des trucs qui peuvent apporter vraiment de la connaissance. Et la deuxième évolution majeure, je le dirais, liée aussi un peu à cette nouvelle stratégie d'évaluation indépendante, a consisté à la mise en place d'une équipe dédiée aux activités de gestion de connaissances, de diffusion et de sensibilisation. Lorsque j'avais rejoint la banque, j'étais assistant d'évaluation, donc j'étais comme un assistant de recherche. Mais en même temps, je m'occupais du help desk de OPEV, de l'évaluation, et je faisais de la gestion des connaissances, je faisais un peu tout. Vous pouvez imaginer tous ces travaux de gestion de connaissances, de communication faits par un assistant de recherche. C'était totalement limité. Aujourd'hui, nous avons une équipe dédiée à ce type d'activité. Et avec cela, nous avons de ce fait renforcé l'engagement avec les parties prenantes. Non seulement avec l'introduction ou bien avec le changement de centre d'intérêt, mais aussi avec la création de cette équipe. Nous nous focalisons maintenant sur l'engagement des parties prenantes pour nous assurer que les évaluations que nous faisons sont utiles et utilisées. Et enfin, un des aspects que je trouve aussi important, parce que la question qu'on nous pose souvent, c'est de savoir comment vous assurer que vos recommandations sont mises en place. Et il y a un aspect important maintenant que nous avons mis en place, c'est le système d'enregistrement des actions de la direction. Lorsque nous faisons une évaluation, la direction, à partir de nos recommandations, est obligée de préparer une réponse en indiquant par rapport à chaque recommandation quel type d'action il faut mener. Et dans ce sens, nous ne restons pas assis en train de supposer qu'ils vont le faire. Nous avons un système qui permet de suivre effectivement dans quelle mesure les actions qu'ils ont préconisées eux-mêmes ont été mises en place. Donc, je vais m'arrêter là-bas. Sinon, il y a plus que ça.
Bien sûr, sur 20 ans comme sur les 40 ans. Merci beaucoup, Joseph. So I'm going to turn to Andrew and Jackie now and ask you, during the COVID-19 pandemic, how did evaluation and knowledge management respectively adapt? Did the pandemic change the way that we evaluate and that we manage knowledge? Andrew?
Well, thank you very much. So, yes, indeed, the pandemic changed the way we evaluated in three distinct ways. The first is in the area of data collection. And the second was actually in the area of evaluation methods. And thirdly, in the area of evaluation capacity development. So in the area of data collection, we radically changed our methods of obtaining data using various online platforms, because then when the pandemic appeared on the scene, we were not able, therefore, to have face-to-face interviews. So we use mobile or digital platforms such as Skype, Zoom, WhatsApp, mobile phone interviews. We also used online surveys by developing questionnaires, which were later programmed into appropriate softwares. Therefore, we could just send links to our respondents. And as a result, we were able to monitor the responses coming from the respondents using the server. And this was particularly important because then we were able to see which respondents have actually submitted their responses. And then we were able to send reminders appropriately to increase the response rate of these surveys. In addition to that, we also increased the use of secondary data sets. The analysis of secondary data sets was therefore able to provide answers to certain evaluation questions. And the use of secondary data sets actually provided very significant evidence, especially for some evaluation questions where we could not easily provide evidence using other means. In addition to that, we also use local experts. IDEV actually works with regional member countries in Africa, and we have worked with a number of local consultants that we could actually contact, and the local consultants provided advantages in the sense that they were actually able to understand the context in which they operate, because we were not able to go to these countries due to the lockdown. At the same time, the local consultants were able to use mobile phones to contact stakeholders, particularly in areas with the low internet connectivity. So those are the adaptations in the area of data collection. So in the area of evaluation methods, we ensure that before we begin any evaluation, or before we commission any evaluation, we had to do evidence gap analysis. And the evidence gap analysis ensured that we were therefore able to identify knowledge gaps. For example, if we were to do an evaluation in energy or transport, we do evidence gap analysis to ensure that we identify those knowledge gaps so that we refocus and refine our evaluation questions appropriately, and also we refocus the scope of the evaluations. So this one became very important, and therefore we were able to use other methods like document reviews, in-depth document reviews, in-depth literature reviews, in-depth portfolio analysis. That one does not mean that before the pandemic, we were not using these methods. But during the pandemic, we wanted to extract as much information as possible from these methods. And that is the reason why we were using in-depth document reviews, in-depth portfolio analysis, in-depth literature reviews, in order to provide sufficient evidence to support our findings. Lastly, but not least, in the area of evaluation capacity development, we had to have suitable technological infrastructure and the skills to actually apply those technologies. Consequently, we have been able to organize and complete 3 very important trainings. One training in SPSS software to provide skills to analyze secondary data sets for our evaluators. And secondly, we have organized also and completed a training on remote data collection techniques, also to provide skills to our evaluators to respond adequately to emerging challenges of face-to-face interviews. Because then we had to rely on remote data collection methods. And thirdly, we had to be innovative in terms of methods. We introduced rapid evaluation methodology. Rapid evaluation methodology is particularly important because it generates evidence quickly, which can be used to make decisions and for policy formulation by policymakers. There are certain key features of this methodology, which I will take just 1 minute to highlight, because those features are very, very important. The method is intensive. It is team-based, and it uses multiple lines of evidence. It is iterative. It is economical and quick, because using this methodology, you can produce a report within 4 to 6 months, which is not the case when we conduct our normal evaluations. And there are 2 important aspects of this methodology, which I should not forget to mention. The fact that it is intensive arises from the fact that it is iterative. Iterative in the sense that when you use this methodology, you collect data and analyze that data immediately. And then after analysis, you get information which leads you to new lines of inquiry so that you find evidence gaps still required to answer the evaluation question. Then you collect again data and analyze immediately. So the iterative process continues until you reach a point of saturation. At saturation point, no new evidence will actually be required to provide information that can answer the evaluation question. So at saturation point, you stop. This methodology is particularly important. And the fact that the method relies on various lines of evidence and the fact that it is iterative ensures validity of the findings in this methodology. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. Jackie, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. On the part of knowledge management, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Regarding knowledge management, I would say that during this pandemic, what we did was really to scale up, I would say, certain things we were doing. Why do I say this? During the pandemic, one thing happened in Africa, and that was the explosion of the use of digital media. If you remember that now everybody was working from home, and therefore they were using online tools more, and they were using virtual platforms. So in a sense, in terms of knowledge management, it was something that we, IDEV, were really prepared for, because all IDEV's work is available online. If you look at all our evaluations, our evaluation results database, all this is available online. So we had all our work in digital formats, unlike many organizations, I would say, and which meant that therefore our stakeholders could access whatever knowledge products that we have. On the side of sharing knowledge, naturally physical events had to stop since we were all keeping isolated. But we also had other events for knowledge sharing, and these were webinars. And if you recall, before the pandemic, we were using, IDEV was already using webinars. But because people were not using digital technology much, they were normally not well attended. And if they were attended by, it would be people who worked in organizations such as ours. But what happened during the pandemic, you had more and more organizations presenting webinars. You had more and more people attending all these webinars all over the world. Remember, we were all at home, and therefore there was, I would say, audiences for these kind of events that were hosted online. So that was a booster for us. And what this made us do was to become even more strategic in the way that we used these platforms. Joseph had mentioned that we had to look at stakeholder engagement more, yes, because remember our stakeholders are being, all of them were accessing all these other material that is online. And so the question is, how do we make sure that the stakeholders, IDEV stakeholders are the ones that are reached and they get the material that they need. And so during the preparation of our evaluations, we took stakeholder mapping seriously, where we identify who our key stakeholders are, identify how we will reach them, the channels of reaching them, and with what products. And so I would say we became more strategic, and I would say more targeted in the way that we got our materials to go out. Physical events, yes, that changed. But on the other hand, we would say because people were available online and they could use these tools, we saw that the online events were bringing in more attendance than we could reach when we had physical events. And this really helped us. And so, and we had to also scale back on the printing work that we did because before the pandemic, we had to cater for also the stakeholders that are not able to access online tools. But now with more stakeholders being able to access online tools, we then could scale back on the print work. So I would say that those are some of the areas where we kind of saw a way that knowledge management for evaluation was boosted. And just to say, as Karen had mentioned, we organized the first evaluation week online, totally online during the pandemic. And we found that even if it was a challenge at that time, now we find that there's more technology, more platforms have risen to the challenge of supporting such kind of events. And so I think the future is bright in terms of knowledge management for evaluation products. I think I can stop here for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. Let me now turn to Girma and May, but also just to remind the audience that if you have questions for our panelists, don't hesitate to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box. So Girma and May, the next question is for you. What role have creativity and innovation played in addressing the challenges and opportunities in evaluations that you have worked on, either at IDEV or in your previous experience? Girma?
Okay, thank you very much, Karen, for this very important question. As you already indicated in your introductory remark, and also Andrew has also raised very critical issues where innovation and creativity played a great role in our evaluation work. So in general, creativity and innovation are at the center of our evaluation work. They help us to keep relevant to the key stakeholder, because as the pandemic demonstrates, we changed our approach in order to meet the information knowledge needs of our stakeholder. So just for practical reason, I would like to focus on two areas where creativity helped us, improving our evaluation work. The first one is on ownership, developing ownership for the evaluation. Often when we do evaluation, it seems that we are just doing for our own department and looks like that. But at the end, we produce knowledge that can be used by other party or relevant stakeholder, which helps them, in order to improve their effectiveness and efficiency in developing development results. And often we usually face, a resistance sometimes when the evaluation particularly focus on programs or policies which were, at early stage of implementation. For example, okay, what do you do because the program is just started? So how can you help here? Because it's at early stage, so we don't have any experience around that. So this is a case where, for example, in 2016, the bank just approved the Feed Africa strategy, which focused on agriculture value chain approach. And in the same year, we started the evaluation of agriculture value chain approach. And so in this case, what happened is our creativity, particularly around theory of change and a combination with a realistic evaluation helped us to be more relevant to the stakeholders' information need. Now, as the stakeholders are getting involved in understanding the conceptual narratives of this our approach, they found that it is very useful. And at the end, by the time the evaluation was completed, particularly the operation department found it very useful in improving, particularly during the implementation of the strategy. And finally, the operation department came up with different approaches based on our evaluation recommendations that helped really the effectiveness of this strategy. The other is on the use, the second is on the use of evaluation. I think here also the creativity in IDEV helped a lot in improving the use of evaluation. This again, one of the challenges, not only IDEV, all evaluation, independent evaluation function face around the world in terms of, okay, we produce such a big, very useful information, but it has to be used. Here, the creativity we actually pursued in this case, like the establishment of the evaluation result database, the management action records, and also engaging, particularly the relevant team, in the operation department during the management response. was very, very useful really in for observation of the evaluation results. So overall, creativity and innovation is really, it influences us for the evaluation to be really remain relevant in this area. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Girma. May, what's been your experience?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to my colleagues. And it's coming at the end of that. I think there's been quite a lot shared already around the issue of creativity and innovation. But I'll share my experiences. And as Karen indicated, I'm fairly new to this department. So my experiences are both from IDEV with the bank, but also in my previous work experience. So in regards to creativity and innovation, it has been critical in helping us rethink and adapt our data collection, methodologies and analysis, as already indicated, but also as we deal with complex interventions or also programs implemented in complex areas, and therefore the way we design them. So for example, when I talk about complex interventions, I'm talking about, these either multifaceted interventions where the pathway from the intervention to the outcome is not straightforward, it's not known, or the path of growth is nonlinear, so we can't predict upfront what are the outcomes, what are the outputs, what are the outcomes and impacts, and therefore our use of the, traditional or theory of change approach is not explicit and feasible at that moment because we can't predict. So here creativity is around just opening, our toolbox wider and using other methodologies. For example, the outcome monitoring approach. This is something we used in my previous work experience as I worked with USAID in terms of evaluating and focusing on the outcomes first and then working backwards retrospectively to define and map the interventions and the way they contribute to the results, because the middle area was gray. This evolved through implementation, so that had to be mapped out backwards in retrospect, and this was helpful in just first of all reconfirming what were the interventions, what were the conditions of success. And this, while is a very participatory approach, but can also be made more rigorous, and more credible by triangulating the data using the methodologies we already have, our interviews, our discussions, our surveys, but also at that point we also added in a layer of, qualitative comparative analysis by looking at the additional effect of different interventions. So in this way, the intervention we were trying to evaluate was, layering of very different cross-sectoral interventions on one community. So it was important that we sort of map out and try to change the way we do the evaluation. So those are some of the ways in the methodologies Andrew has already shared, and Girma plus Jackie as well, about the digital, embracing the digital advancement that's ongoing to be able to either reach or interact with different groups. So right now, we have virtual focus group discussions. What we used to know was just the face-to-face, but now we have the virtual focus group discussions where we have to interact. Right now, Girma and I are implementing a youth evaluation, and those are the elements that, we have to look at, especially as we deal with youth who are more tech savvy and more used to using these kinds of platforms. So that's where creativity comes in. But also, as I think Andrew indicated, in the areas in the absence of data, sometimes interventions implemented in the complex environments, whether it's during a crisis, conflicts, but we still need to determine what's the learning, what worked, what didn't work. And these are evaluations if you're unable to do it on real time and going backwards. Some of the challenges you're facing are baselines, monitoring information, but even just availability of implementers and beneficiaries, respondents. Who do you talk to? Because at sometimes either people have moved on or been resettled. So that's a challenge. And here the understanding is how we strengthen our evaluability assessment and really how we strengthen the design process of the evaluation to be more interactive and participatory, to work with relevant persons to define what is the potential but also feasible scope of this particular evaluation. How do we use, what are existing data sources? How do we use them? But this is time that sometimes we don't allocate to the evaluations because we move from concept to implementation. At this time, the scoping and design part is a little bit more in-depth to allow the foray and exploration into those different elements, and that's a choice that has to be made. But of course, with it is the choice of saying, okay, this is not feasible, we can't evaluate anymore. So that window has to remain open as well. Lastly, I will talk to how we are making better use of the vast evaluative knowledge that we already have. Yeah, and here within the bank, was beginning to use more the evaluation synthesis. Yeah. Approach to really harness and distill lessons from existing evaluations into very, tangible and succinct knowledge products that can be used by operations departments as they, refine strategies, design policies. And this, really it involves really looking at existing evaluations, and this can be broadened to also look at evaluations by other organizations to pick their experiences, but also more recently, we are also embedding peer-reviewed articles and lay literature when we come to areas where there is not as much evaluations already done. We have had to make a choice to include other forms of evidence to sort of complement and build the evidence base. Of course, there are considerations to ensure quality that have to be made, but I think it's an opportunity to do that. And within AfDB in the previous years, we've done a similar synthesis on private sector development, on gender mainstreaming, and right now we're looking at inclusive growth and also similarly in agricultural productivity. So it was there, it was a methodology that was there, but within AfDB is really being looked at as a very complementary effort to support learning. So I'm going to stop there for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, May. No, indeed, what you say certainly resonates, and indeed the African Development Bank recently approved a food production facility for which we also provided knowledge in the form of a lessons note, where we looked not only at the lessons from evaluations of AfDB operations, but also brought in evaluative lessons from other organizations such as the World Bank and the FAO, and that was very much appreciated by the board. So indeed, what you say it's indeed, it resonates. Would any of the other panelists like to add specifically on the question of creativity and innovation?
Oui, Karen, je vais commencer peut-être par l'aspect de l'utilisation des consultants locaux, en disant que, en fait, c'est pas une pratique qui est nouvelle, mais avant, c'était un peu difficile de justifier l'utilisation des consultants locaux parce que les gens avaient besoin d'avoir quelqu'un qui vient, comme le disait le président une fois, si tu fais de la recherche avec des gens qui viennent de Harvard, quelle valeur ajoutée tu apportes vraiment au niveau de l'Afrique en termes de pratique. Et donc, nous avons eu toujours cette pratique d'utiliser les consultants locaux parce que ça fait partie aussi du renforcement des capacités en évaluation. En pratique, dans nos pays, il y a beaucoup de spécialistes en suivi et évaluation qui font plus du suivi que de l'évaluation. Et donc, qui, malgré cela, participent à beaucoup de formations en évaluation, mais n'ont jamais eu la chance de pouvoir mettre en pratique les connaissances qu'ils acquièrent dans ces différentes formations. Et donc, le fait de pouvoir utiliser les consultants locaux dans nos évaluations, ce fait a été renforcé par la situation de Covid. Il y a effectivement des inconvénients et des avantages, mais je pense que de façon globale, c'est plus avantageux, non seulement pour IDEV, mais aussi pour le pays. Parce qu'en dehors des actions de la banque, le pays aussi fait des investissements qui nécessitent d'être évalués. Deuxièmement, en termes d'innovation, je crois que lorsqu'on parle, par exemple, d'évaluation rigoureuse d'impact, la question qu'on se posait souvent à la banque, qui doit faire ces évaluations d'impact? Est-ce que c'est le département de recherche? Est-ce que c'est IDEV, etc. Au niveau de la Banque mondiale, par exemple, il y a une structure dédiée pour faire des évaluations. Mais finalement, nous sommes arrivés à faire des évaluations d'impact rigoureuses au niveau d'IDEV avec vraiment des méthodes innovatives. Donc, je prends l'exemple de l'évaluation d'impact que nous avons fait sur le projet routier du Ghana, pour lequel, en dehors du fait de calculer les effets du projet sur certains indicateurs, nous avons été amenés à ajouter des dimensions interpersonnelles. Donc, nous avons utilisé une approche intégrale dans une évaluation d'impact. Et je crois que dans l'évaluation aussi du dernier rapport, de la dernière évaluation d'impact sur last mile en énergie, il y a vraiment une innovation en termes de méthodologie. Je crois que nous avons utilisé des données spatiales, etc., etc. Je vais m'arrêter là.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Joseph. So we're going to take some questions from the audience now. I see there are 2 questions in the chat. So the first one is from Fode. I don't know if this is our former colleague Fode Touré, but the question is from Fode to Andrew, who would like Andrew to elaborate a bit more on when he spoke about how evaluation adapted during the COVID-19 pandemic on 2 aspects. Firstly, on document review and literature review, and secondly, the economic attributes of rapid evaluation approach, given the rest of the attributes. So that's a question for Andrew. And the second question is from our colleague, Apollo Kioyene from the gender department, saying the availability of gender data during implementation and in completion reports has been a problem. How has IDEV managed to assess the gender impact of projects with this challenge? So I'll let some of the panelists think about that. I'll first give the floor to Andrew, but please be very brief. Time is running away from us. So please go ahead, Andrew.
So thank you very much. So document reviews and literature reviews are not new ways of collecting information in IDEV, except that during the pandemic, given that we were not able to get primary data through face-to-face interviews, we decided to do in-depth document reviews and in-depth literature reviews, also in-depth portfolio reviews, so that we were therefore able to extract more information and more evidence to support our findings. That is the adaptation. Otherwise, in situations or in the older situation where there was no COVID, we were still doing document reviews and performing portfolio reviews and also literature reviews. But now we were devoting more time to these particular approaches in order to extract as much information as possible, as I have indicated. Concerning the economic attribute, I can say that due to the fact that this methodology takes a shorter time as compared to the other evaluation methods that we use, where an evaluation can take up to one year and even 2 months, 1 year, 3 months, and so on. So the fact that it takes between 4 to 6 months, I think, reduces the cost, because the less the time, the less the cost of resources that are going to be employed. And but we can also say that it is an intensive process, but the time actually reduces that cost. Because somebody can argue that if it is intensive, then you expect it to be costly. But the time that is going to be used actually reduces the cost significantly. And also the fact that in this particular evaluation methodology, the questions are much more focused, as I indicated before. So you don't just collect data anyhow, but you collect data with a specific focus, because the questions have been refined so that now you just look for particular sources of data that will respond to that specific question, because the questions are much more focused when we are looking at this particular methodology.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Which of the panelists would like to take the question from Apollo on how we have managed to assess the gender impact of projects in the face of limited availability of data?
Je crois que je peux essayer d'apporter quelques éclaircissements. En fait, les problèmes de données dans les projets ne concernent pas seulement l'aspect genre. En général, le système de suivi et évaluation dans le cadre de nos projets sont souvent faibles. Pourquoi c'est faible? Parce que souvent la question que celui qui vient chercher un financement se pose. Dois-je dépenser de l'argent pour faire du suivi et évaluation alors que cet argent peut me permettre de construire un puits d'eau, par exemple? Et donc, on se retrouve dans la pratique avec un système de suivi et évaluation qui est faible. Mais ce n'est pas à cause de ça qu'on ne fera pas l'évaluation. Donc, en général, on utilise deux approches qui ont été déjà mentionnées ultérieurement. D'abord, l'utilisation des données secondaires. On est en mesure, lorsque vous faites une bonne recherche, de trouver des données secondaires, soit au niveau de l'Institut de statistique ou bien même d'autres partenaires de développement qui ont fait des évaluations dans la même zone et parfois même sur le même projet. Donc, il faut vraiment s'assurer qu'on peut trouver des données secondaires déjà disponibles. Mais après, il faut savoir les analyser, les interpréter avec prudence parce que parfois, ce n'est pas évident. Et deuxièmement, ce qu'on fait, notamment lorsqu'on fait une évaluation de projet, on ajoute une composante de mini-enquête. Une mini-enquête, ça peut vraiment être quelque chose de 500 ménages qui permet vraiment d'estimer certaines, ou bien d'avoir certaines informations qui nous manquent dans le cadre du projet. Donc, voilà comment on arrive à gérer ce problème de données qui va au-delà de l'aspect genre.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Joseph. So we would now, before we go to the second set of questions, I would actually now like to share with you in a video that we recently made of our 2021 annual report, which shows how IDEV has been providing evidence for the bank, which I mentioned in my opening remarks. So I'm now going to show that video to you. I'll just ask all of the panelists to just turn off their cameras for now, and I will do the same. And I will show you the video.
We are Independent Development Evaluation, and we support the African Development Bank Group in achieving greater development effectiveness. 2021 has been a year of exceptional coordination. Our evaluations were timed to inform new policy strategies and frameworks on the bank's agenda. And they were responsive to the bank's need to account not only for its lending, but also for soft contributions to development, policy dialogue, knowledge management, and economic and sector work.
In 2021, we delivered 13 evaluation products. These have provided evidence for discussions on new AfDB country strategy papers, the new sustainable borrowing policy, the midterm review of the results measurement framework, revisions to the ADOA framework, and a new fragility strategy, as well as institutional capacity building workshops in African member countries.
Using knowledge from previous evaluations, we also contributed to other strategic discussions over the year, such as on the water sector policy and strategy, the climate change and green growth policy and strategy, the new trust fund policy, the sovereign operations restructuring policy, the private sector development strategy, and the new public-private partnerships framework. 2021 was also a year of strong contribution to evaluation networks, partnerships, and capacity development initiatives, despite the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We organized learning events, co-organized others, and contributed to many.
We produced knowledge products and maintained communication tools. Above all, we made sure that our evidence was seen, heard, and taken on board within the bank and across the globe.
Just as the bank is growing stronger armed with evaluative evidence, IDEV continues to deliver. In 2021, our 48 employees covered the spectrum of skills needed to support the AfDB, from technical skills and quality assurance through to strengthened knowledge management and communication. The AfDB Board of Directors, management and staff guided us towards a new work program for 2022-2024 that will continue to deliver timely evaluative evidence to support the bank. We look forward to implementing it.
Right. So we're going to go into the second set of questions now for our panelists. And again, audience members, if you have questions for our panelists, don't hesitate to type them into the chat or into the Q&A box. I think I see another question popping up right there. First, let me go to May and to Jackie. So looking forward, from the COVID-19 pandemic, what lessons do you see for evaluation, for knowledge management, and for Africa? What lessons can we draw from this crisis or from our experience during this crisis to inform the way forward and our future response? Let me go to May first.
Okay, thank you, Karen, for that question. So in terms of lessons for evaluation, I think it was, we reconfirmed but learned that, evaluations are adapting. We are adapting to the situations and circumstances we are operating in, and evaluations continued to provide necessary evidence and, real-time evidence to support either response or recovery efforts. So the elements of our adaptations in terms of the data collection methodologies, the remote engagement, the use of virtual technologies, or even the local consultants using the local expertise and data. Those are things that worked for us and are areas that we need to continue to strengthen going forward to improve, to build the foundation for future, for any other crises. There are many already happening still at this time, but when we have such capacity in place, it's easier to leap off that and continue to evolve and adapt accordingly. Linked to that is the lessons from previous management of crises, were important and they were useful. I think for AfDB, one of the initial areas was around preparing, lessons from the management of the Ebola pandemic in West Africa to try and understand how did the bank respond, both in terms of programs, but also systems. I think having an intentional way of capturing those lessons on an ongoing basis is something, because it works, it helps to provide information on, how to prepare responses, how the bank can adapt, but also even how member countries adapt. So preparing those kinds of lessons is important. And I can say, I think for right now, we are, the bank is conducting an evaluation on the crisis, response efforts. So our generating such knowledge will help our current crisis, but also any future ones. And that is not only very targeted evaluations on responses, but also how we integrate such questions in ongoing evaluations so that we are building the evidence base as we go along. And that is something that we all have to be, we are being intentional about, but also we all have to be intentional about, such that once again, we are building a good evidence base. I think Apollo and Joseph discussed a question around gender, in the absence of data, how are we able to tell the gender impact of our programs? I think, one of our lessons is also that we don't always know what is the most effective or efficient or impactful intervention for certain population groups, especially the vulnerable. And we did discover that, we learned COVID, that these groups were more affected than others, whether it's the women, whether it's the youth, workers in the informal sector, disabled, but as both Apollo and Joseph pointed out, with our M&E systems, if our monitoring systems are not configured right now to sufficiently tell those impacts as accurately, both in terms of what we monitor, whether we are focusing mostly on outputs, but not so much on outcomes and impacts, but also even when we monitor our big programs, are we able to tell the impact of those programs on those specific groups, So for example, if it's an infrastructure project, yes, we are able to talk about, the impact on, the outcomes around the connectivity, reduction in time or improvement in access to markets, but for who benefited and in what way and how did it change? So as we prepare our response and recovery efforts, having access to that information to enable us to know how to target and rebuild some of those excluded populations better is something that we are finding that we don't have as much information on, and therefore meaning that we have to inbuild, balance in our monitoring and evaluation systems to pick such information on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to stop there for now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, May. No, that's indeed a very important point you make, because crises are, of course, unexpected. And I mean, 3 years ago, no one thought we would have a pandemic, and after the pandemic, no one thought we would have a war, which would be affecting Africa. So indeed, it is important to capture those lessons on an ongoing basis to be better prepared for anything that you're not expecting. Jackie?
Thanks, Karen. Maybe just to add on and to emphasize on what May has said, looking at the vast evaluative knowledge that IDEV has, one thing that really struck me during the pandemic was that IDEV is the institutional memory for the bank. I mean, if you think about it, IDEV has been evaluating the bank, what has worked, what does not work, made recommendations, generated lessons for many years. If you go into our database, you will find evaluations dating back many years. The other interesting thing that you also find in these evaluations is that whatever is being evaluated, there is what is known as the context. And I find that really interesting. If you're looking at the energy sector, the first discussion will be about the context of the energy sector at the time of the evaluation. If it's a country strategy, they will look at the country context at that time. So it is not only the findings and the evaluative knowledge that we generate as part of our evaluations, but also what we document is existing at that time. And why I think that's really, really important is that then it helps us, as May had said, to generate lessons for the bank. And as I saw during this COVID crisis, we were called upon to generate lessons, for example, from the bank's crisis response to budget support operations in the past. And the bank really used this in whatever budget support operations that it had to undertake at that time. And so as well as helping inform how the bank has operated before during crisis, I think we also have the opportunity to be able to forecast. Yes, right now there are crises. We have the war that's going on, the food crisis. We now have the fuel crisis. We've had fuel crises in the past, and there are a lot of other crises. And the question is, if you look at, for example, the state of fragility within Africa, what other crises can we predict in some of the countries that we work in? And therefore, what evaluative knowledge can we go back and really bring forward and say, okay, in the case that you're going into recovery programs, this is how you could go because this is what has happened in the past. So I really do think that there is an opportunity for that for us in the future. And maybe just to think that, as I said, with digital platforms are now rising, we are now seeing emerging technologies artificial intelligence, things like machine learning, and just wondering how we can also use these kind of emerging technologies, even in our own systems here, to help us also extract some of these knowledge that we have that we probably could link together in certain ways to tell other stories or give more information. So this is where I'm looking at the way forward for evaluative knowledge. Thank you.
Very interesting points, Jackie. Would any of the other panelists like to add on the lessons that we can draw from the COVID-19 pandemic? Yes, Guillermo, go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. I think the previous panelists stressed very important point already. Just what I would like to add, particularly in terms of the evaluation function itself overall. One of the key lessons that we learned is that how we prepare ourselves, in terms of evaluative expertise and so on. This is what I have seen now. The IDEV has stepped up on many trainings in terms of, like remote data collection system, and as well as other, digital-based aspects. So evaluation functions around the world have also prepared themselves accordingly in order to respond to those emerging, situation in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Guillermo. All right, let me come to the next question for the panelists. And this one is addressed to Joseph and to Guillermo. As the African Development Bank continues to support its regional member countries to build back better from this pandemic, in addressing infrastructure gaps, economic and social challenges, and building a resilient continent to face future crises, how can evaluation help? Joseph?
Ok, je crois que la première des choses, c'est partager ce que nous savons faire. Et donc, je dirais que la première des choses que nous devons faire, c'est il faut d'abord qu'on soit conscient que le développement est un processus complexe et ce que nous pensons pouvoir faire peut ne pas arriver. Et donc, nous avons besoin justement de partager les résultats de nos évaluations, c'est-à-dire nos constatations, nos enseignements et nos recommandations. Je prends l'exemple spécifique des infrastructures. Le fait est qu'il y a effectivement un déficit d'infrastructures. Et pour répondre à ce déficit, la tendance générale serait qu'il faut qu'on mobilise plus de financement pour les infrastructures. Mais l'évaluation nous a montré que c'est une condition nécessaire, mais pas suffisante. Parce que mobiliser les ressources en soi n'est pas la seule solution. Il faut qu'on tienne compte de ce que nous appelons des enseignements récurrents qui apparaissent dans pratiquement toutes les évaluations. L'une des premières leçons, par exemple, concerne les études de faisabilité. Et nous nous sommes rendus compte que le fait que toute conception de projet, de programme, de stratégie nécessite une phase préparatoire solide avec des études de faisabilité qui sont adéquates et actualisées pour une mise en œuvre réussie. Si vous ne le faites pas, pendant la mise en œuvre, vous allez vous retrouver avec des mauvaises conceptions, des retards, des coûts élevés. Deuxièmement, le processus participatif. Tout le monde sait qu'on a besoin de faire participer, mais la participation à plusieurs niveaux. Ce qu'on fait, c'est plutôt une consultation ou une information des parties prenantes au lieu de faire une vraie participation. Troisièmement, les choix technologiques qu'on fait. Parfois, on cherche à prendre les technologies les plus sophistiquées qui ne sont peut-être pas adaptées au contexte. Et lorsqu'on parle, par exemple, des infrastructures résilientes, on veut des infrastructures qui qui peuvent absorber, qui ont la capacité d'absorber les chocs, les chocs causés par des phénomènes naturels, par exemple. Donc, le choix des technologies est primordial. Et aussi, nous avons mis en exergue la nécessité d'avoir des solutions intégrées. Parce que venir avec un projet isolé ne permet pas parfois d'atteindre les résultats qu'on veut avoir. On a parfois besoin d'avoir des solutions intégrées. Et enfin, donc, la notion importante de durabilité. Parce que ça ne sert à rien de mobiliser des fonds additionnels si on ne s'intéresse pas à la durabilité de ce que nous sommes en train de produire. Donc, ces notions, donc ces types d'informations doivent être partagées, toujours partagées. Mais il faut noter que partager une information n'implique pas forcément que la personne puisse utiliser l'information. Et nous, on a trouvé une stratégie, sachant que nous sommes indépendants, nous reconnaissons aussi que nous ne devons pas être isolés. Si nous voulons avoir vraiment de l'impact au niveau de la banque, nous devons réellement nous engager, quitte à aider dans certaines mesures nos collègues des opérations à préparer certains éléments essentiels comme les théories de changement, les cas logiques, etc., de sorte que les mêmes erreurs ne reviennent pas. Et on profite de ces discussions avec eux pour pouvoir partager effectivement. C'est comme ça seulement que les choses peuvent changer. Sinon, l'information peut être disponible, mais la mise en œuvre de cette information dans la pratique parfois est difficile. Et donc, notre engagement, en maintenant bien sûr notre indépendance, on est assez mûr pour maintenir notre indépendance. Personne ne peut nous influencer. Donc, en maintenant cette indépendance, nous devons être en mesure d'impacter la conception même des interventions de la banque. Donc, en résumé, il faut partager les connaissances, notamment les constatations, les leçons récurrentes qui reviennent. C'est les mêmes trucs qui reviennent. Il faut essayer de les partager. Et deuxièmement, il faut aussi les aider. Il faut les aider et aider nos collègues des opérations à pouvoir mettre en pratique les bonnes pratiques. Mettre en œuvre les bonnes pratiques, je dirais. Merci.
Yes, indeed. A lesson drawn is not necessarily a lesson learned, right? We have to help our colleagues. We can draw the lessons, but we have to help our colleagues to learn the lessons, indeed. No, I was smiling when you mentioned technological choices that are appropriate for the context, because I remember, I think, a certain finding in your evaluation of the water and sanitation evaluation, where certain types of sanitation facilities were not appropriate for the context and therefore were not used. So that was, yes, the very appropriate to mention. Girma, we come to you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Joseph has said most of really important issues where the evaluation should contribute in building back better from this pandemic. As you know, the stakeholder task evaluation to generate, rigorous evidence. That's the main purpose that we are, working in evaluation. This rigorous evidence has to better, inform better choices in terms of policies and strategies. So when the stakeholder evaluation helps us to make decision in the right direction. So that's how it has been helping so far, and we have witnessed that evaluation results has been really helped to respond to the pandemic, as well as also in recovery from the this pandemic in general. So I'd like to just give you one example from the evaluation we completed in 2020, for example, in the Uganda country strategy evaluation. The evaluation draws a very good lessons and recommendation, particularly in designing, interventions that better build the economy further. So particularly, the evaluation recommended to consolidate further on the, the infrastructures, which are the basic forces for the economic growth, and they also make the basis for resilience of any kind of, future crisis. So in addition, not only in COVID-19, the evaluation also helped to deal with our current situation, as you already mentioned. Particularly, the evaluation helped to draw key lessons to inform the bank's new initiative on the Africa Emergency Food Production Facility, where the IDEV quickly come up with really very important lessons that really helped the bank to design appropriate interventions, particularly focusing on increasing agricultural productivity. As you know, many countries are banning exports in order to deal with their own domestic demand. So Africa has to also build its own domestic capacity. So our evaluation feed into all these things. In addition, we should not also forget, like, the climate change issues are there. We are dealing with flooding, drought every time, and our evaluations are also, I think, involving there in the annual report videos that we just showed. The bank's evaluation has our evaluation contributed to the strategy on climate change. So overall, our evaluation will be ready to contribute really the bank to address emerging issues as well as to support the country's development. So evaluation is one of the key knowledge bases to which the stakeholder result, not only at the time of business as usual, but also at an emergency situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Germa, and thank you, Joseph. And we will be delving a bit deeper into these topics at the AfDB Development Evaluation Week, which will take place at the end of September. Would any of the other panelists like to share additional insights on how evaluation can help build back better and build resilience?
Yes, Karen. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think I would only, reiterate something I raised earlier about how our systems and using our evaluations to really look at development outcomes, impacts, and the implications on certain population groups, because I think it's important in our, sort of recovery efforts in trying to understand if we're looking at economic transformation, how do you transform and how does that benefit whole communities and whole sectors? So I would only just re-emphasize that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, May. So we'll go to some further questions from the audience. So any attendees, if you have further questions for our panelists, please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We have a question from our colleague Jane. We mentioned some of the lessons that we drew from the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of adapting our methods and our evaluation methodologies. What lessons can we draw about building capacities on soft skills like communication or working in teams or managing knowledge? Any lessons that you see in those areas, panelists?
Maybe I could say something on this in terms of communication, in terms of building soft skills. I think one of the areas that we do have a problem with evaluations is that in many cases, and I'm looking beyond, of course, IDEV, because we've got our knowledge management team and communications team, so I think we are thorough on this. But many organizations do overlook the importance of actually designing some plan on how to communicate certain kinds of information, and therefore also budget for it. Because I think one of the things that you find is, I mean, as you can testify, knowledge management and communication is cost dependent, I mean, resource intensive. It does cost to really prepare some good materials, to quality assure it, to make it prepared in a way that it can be disseminated in whichever format that you use. And so some of the areas when it comes to designing evaluations and being very thorough about your dissemination plan is so that upfront you can already budget for these costs and make sure that in the case that you're an evaluation unit or so that does not have knowledge management or communication support, that you can actually go out there and look for it because you have budgeted for this. Now, in terms of building capacities within our regional member countries, I think this is also an area, because I do know that when we do our capacity building within our countries, we focus a lot on just evaluation side, but probably we should also accompany this with a communication kind of training, skills training, so that people know what to expect, what kind of products that they should be able to prepare at a minimum, and how to do it. So I think we can always accompany our capacity development event with an aspect of knowledge management, whether it is writing, actually, how to write effectively, whether it is preparing an infographic or any kind of information products that we do. And just that, and giving advice on how to do this. I think that's what I can say for now.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. So I don't see any other questions from the audience. Here comes one now. À quel niveau de la chaîne de résultats peut-on percevoir concrètement la collaboration entre les évaluateurs et les équipes des opérations? So indeed, I think Joseph spoke of, and Guillermo also spoke about engagement with operations departments and operations teams. Maybe Joseph, can you perhaps elaborate on that? À quel niveau de la chaîne de résultats peut-on percevoir concrètement la collaboration entre les évaluateurs et les équipes des opérations?
Je ne sais pas c'est la chaîne de résultats de quoi, mais je dirais que dans la pratique, les collègues des opérations nous contactent lorsqu'ils commencent à préparer leur théorie de changement, etc., etc. Et donc, les phases initiales de préparer qui consistent à trouver c'est quoi le problème de développement, comment on veut résoudre le problème, ça, c'est des aspects un peu plus techniques qu'ils font eux-mêmes. Et donc, nous, ce que nous faisons, nous essayons de les challenger sur ce qu'ils pensent. Et lorsqu'ils disent qu'en faisant ceci, je veux obtenir cela, nous leur posons la question, vous êtes sûr qu'on peut passer de cet aspect à cet aspect? Après, ils se posent la question, ils disent, oh, effectivement, c'est pas aussi direct que ça. C'est donc dans cette conception de finalisation de leur théorie de changement, de l'intervention qu'ils sont en train de préparer, qu'on apporte souvent notre rapport. Et en général, c'est eux-mêmes qui nous sollicitent. Actuellement, je crois qu'on a des problèmes actuellement parce qu'on a tellement de demandes qu'on ne peut pas répondre à toutes les demandes, donc on est parfois obligé de faire des sélections. Mais en résumé, c'est vraiment dans les aspects techniques de clarification parce que lorsque vous définissez mal le problème de développement, les actions que vous allez entreprendre seront différentes. Et donc, vous risquez de ne pas atteindre les objectifs escomptés. Donc, on essaie de... Eux, ce sont les experts. Nous, avec notre, disons, culture de développement, même lorsque lui, il est spécialiste dans son domaine, on peut l'aider à clarifier ce qu'il veut faire. Donc, voilà ce que je peux dire par rapport à la question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Joseph. We do have several examples of where after an evaluation was concluded and this informed the preparation of a new policy or new strategy, that the evaluation task manager would act sort of as a peer reviewer of the new policy or strategy to ensure that all the lessons and recommendations had been appropriately taken on board. And precisely as you say, Joseph, the definition of the theory of change is indeed very, very important. So in the absence of any further questions from the audience, is there anything that any of the panelists would still like to add? If not, then I think we'll come to the wrap up. So I think we've had some very interesting discussions, and we've heard about some of the major developments at IDEV, the evolution of IDEV in terms of the reorganization of its focus from the project level more to higher level, sector level evaluations, stronger engagement with stakeholders, stronger knowledge management, dissemination, reaching out. We also heard about how we have adapted our practices during COVID-19, like in the area of data collection. The methods of obtaining data were changed using the online platforms, virtual platforms, greater use of local consultants, not really a new practice, but definitely more used and very, very useful because they understood the context in which they operated. We scaled up on knowledge management, increasing the use of online tools. Of course, we already had a lot of work in digital format, but with online events, we managed to reach a larger audience, such as through webinars and other digital products. We heard about how we applied some innovation and creativity in evaluations, in methodologies, in applying these to complex situations, also looking at other organizations, learning from each other. We discussed some of the lessons that we can draw from the pandemic, and the value, the importance of sharing our knowledge and engaging with operations departments to ensure that they learn the lessons that we draw and implement and apply them in new interventions. This can also help with the Building Back Better agenda, the building resilience, to continue sharing our evaluation results and the lessons and some of the recurring issues that we keep finding in our evaluations to really help the institution to overcome those challenges. So I think we've had a very rich discussion. And so I would like to very warmly thank all of our panelists, thank all of the participants, our interpreters, and the organizing team who organized this whole event and put it together. We invite you all to join us for the AfDB Evaluation Week, which will take place online from 28th to 30th of September on the theme of building a stronger and more resilient Africa, where we will discuss development evaluation as a crucial tool to help build a resilient continent that can face its current and future challenges. There will be more information on the Evaluation Week on the IDEV website very soon. And so we hope to see you all there at the end of September. So thank you all again very much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.